Yeah, I'm Maxine Durand. I'm a lifelong Idaho resident. I grew up in Richfield, and I've been in public service of one form or another for this is year 12 now, I think. So I've worked in multiple government agencies and nonprofits. Most recently, I worked for the city of Twin Falls, where I ran the public transit system. And I'm running for governor for a lot of reasons, but mainly because I think I've got a good platform that is, based on my experience working in public service for this long and what I've seen, you know, serving people. And so I'm basically just, taking the personal risk of thinking that, I think most people understand that these are just good policies for Idaho, and I'm, staking my claim on that. Yeah, and I mean, look, I'm not going to go on the whole, lecture series about like the history of socialism and everything, right? And there's a lot of people that they kind of ask that question, and I think that that's what they're trying to make me do. Um, but look, just break it down into its component parts, right? It's democratic. I'm a member of DSA. Everything that we do within DSA chapters is done by vote. It's done by, popular vote. We have a democratic system within the organization. And then socialism is, in my mind, right, it's similar to the policies that I'm running on. So these are services that are designed for people, where government takes a more active role than effectively just letting the free market do whatever it wants. And I think a lot of people get lost on a word when the reality is, like if I were out here pitching a public library, if we didn't have that and it was like a new idea, people would say, oh, that's socialism. We don't do that here. And it's like, we do though, and it's really just about kind of taking that back and you know taking the fear out of it and just understanding like this is about policies that are designed to provide services and help people. That's really it. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to change everything about how you live your life. I'm not trying to take your guns away, right? Like I have spent a lifetime in public service just trying to help people and build systems that make sense with our taxpayer dollars. And I am really, really tired of seeing just like basic services get pushed to the wayside because people are afraid of the S word. Yeah, well, I mean, just as an aside, I want to say I'm a big fan of Mr. Mamdani's public transit plan. As someone who previously ran a public transit system, what he's proposing is absolutely possible. It's a matter of funding, but it's absolutely something that you could do, and I'm very enthusiastic about seeing how he pulls it off. But as far as my campaign, the big ones are always, healthcare, housing, and making sure people have access to things, right? So like public transportation is also part of my platform. I have an idea for a public transit trust fund for the state of Idaho. I am interested in advocating for additional construction and inventory for like mixed income public housing and tenants' rights. I've been endorsed by Boise Tenants United. They're now Treasure Valley Tenants Union. Um, and then an Idaho-based Medicare for all system, comparable to like what Bernie Sanders had proposed, for his Medicare for all nationally, but just on a state level, basically by expanding Idaho Medicare and Medicaid. Yeah. And I'd say first of all, to your point about it being a hot button issue for a long time, right? I mean, I'm not oblivious to that. I used to work for Idaho Medicaid, so I know what that system is like on the inside. Um, when I was working there, so I worked in the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse. And while I was there, part of my job, I wrote the contract between Idaho Medicaid and Optum Health, because basically the way it works, right? And like I was part of a team, right? Like I did the actual technical writing. I worked with the clinicians. I worked with the legal department, right? Like it got passed around until it was good. But um, what I learned from that experience is like we don't actually do much of anything in Idaho government. We cut a check, and that seems to be our answer for everything. We kick it out to the private sector. And so, for something like healthcare, which you and me and everyone else needs to survive, we are incentivizing a private company, supposedly to do a better job than our clinicians working for the state can do. And all it really does is they make a profit off of something that, frankly, I think it's immoral to make a profit off of, right? Um, I saw working in that office too that like the clinicians that were brought on to advise and oversee this contract were never happy with what we were doing. It was always the common assumption that like we could do this better ourselves. And there was always this revolving door. So you'd have people that would come in and they've got their MBA and they come in, they work for the office and they supervise the contract for a couple years, and then suddenly they're working for the company that's running the contract. And that's totally okay, apparently, right? That's not a overly close relationship at all in most people's minds. I disagree. It's a very predatory system, and instead of using the power of our government institutions to basically reclaim that and run it for people with our tax dollars, we're letting private companies profit off of public health care. So, I mean, that's the reason we need to do it. I'm telling you that the systems we have in place, like there are competent people who could make this work already. So the issue really does come down to funding and politics. And so then that's the part where, look, I'm not oblivious to the challenges of this, right? I'm running as a socialist in conservative Idaho. I understand what that sounds like. And what I'm saying is, if we can get a movement together that can put me in the governor's office, that same movement is the one that's going to put the pressure needed on, the people who need to vote to get a bill to my desk. People are going to scoff at that. They're going to act like it's not possible. But like the truth is, like we have let both parties tell us for so long now that this just isn't how we do things here, and that we have to go through proper channels, and that there's never any money for anything. Um, but nobody ever asks that question when we're writing tax cuts for rich people, right? No one asks that question when we're gutting public education. Nobody asks that question when we're writing these contracts with the private sector. They only ask me because I'm the one out here saying, hey, maybe we should do things differently, right? And to be fair, you should ask that question. You should be skeptical, right? But I think it does a disservice to write it off as like, well, that's going to be hard, so we're just not going to do it, right? I think the biggest thing that I learned working in the city of Twin Falls is that most of the national level politics is really just a sports jersey. Some of the biggest advocates and supporters that I had running Ride TFT in Twin Falls, both for myself personally and for the program I was running, were people who had voted for Donald Trump. And when I first took the job, I didn't, I didn't broadcast my politics at the time, right? But I had people come into my cubicle and immediately call me a communist, and tell me that this wasn't going to work because we love our cars here and this is a waste of taxpayer money. And I had some of those same people come back to me after a few months and actually apologize, because what changed was they used the service for themselves, like their car was in the shop, or they needed to borrow it or something, or like they had a grandmother who needed it for a doctor's appointment, and then it clicks, right? Like, oh, like this is good for the community. Um, and so what I saw was, at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters if there's an R or a D next to your name. I think it matters if you show up for people. I think it matters if you actually do the right thing by them, and stand by the work that you do in the communities that you serve. I think that that earns a lot of people's respect, sometimes begrudgingly, sure, but like that's what really matters. And this whole like Republican Democrat thing, like this is the sports jersey that we put on every few years. We go and cast our ballot and then we take it off, right? But um, that's probably the biggest thing I learned is like, look, there's no, despite what we were told about polarization, I think most people have the same basic needs. As far as what I would do differently, I think I think that Idaho has a lot of problems with the good old boys that go along to get along, and they have a vision for what Idaho ought to be, and they are going to dictate it to us until they're blue in the face. And until we do something about it, they are going to keep winning. We're never going to make any progress. We're always going to be, in the bottom percentile in almost every metric compared to other states. We have so much promise and potential. And what I'm telling you from working inside the machine is that most of the major decisions that affect our body politic in this state come down to a handful of individuals and who is having scotch with them. And I knew that going in, but if I could do it over again, I wouldn't be as trusting, and I would probably come in uh, with a little bit more. I wouldn't say cynicism, um, but maybe tact, in the sense that I knew that people in power were lying to me, and I gave them the benefit of the doubt because I felt like that was the right thing to do. And the only thing that's changed in my mind, it isn't why I serve, it isn't who I serve. If anything, I've only gotten better at it. It's I am not going to be pushed around by people that think that they know how the world works just because they've been around a little bit longer than me. Um, and that's not anyone specific, but I do think that a lot of the inner workings of towns like Twin Falls are commonplace in a lot of other parts in Idaho, and they're definitely true at our state house. I mean, the Venn diagram of people who dislike public transit because they think it's a waste of taxpayer dollars, and it's communism and all of that, and the people who are against universal health care, the people who are signing all of these like anti-LGBTQ plus bills and like the library bills, right? Like the good old boys, like that Venn diagram is a circle. These are the same people. And I think, like I've said, I think that both parties in our state have let us down, because the Republicans act like they're doing you a favor by gutting all of our social safety net and giving taxes to the rich. And the Democrats pretend to put up a fight and then pat themselves on the back because even though they keep losing, at least they were morally right. And it's not getting us anywhere. I would say, yeah, like the biggest thing I would do differently, or I guess the thing that I take forward with me, and why I'm running this election, um, we have to fight harder. As citizens of Idaho, we have to fight harder. There is just this entrenched like cronyism and rot in our government, and it's not going to go away until we actually show our teeth as people. Yeah. So as far as my agricultural policies, look, I grew up on a farm myself. The average age of the American farmer, from what I've read, is over 60. And I think we've got, by some estimates, about a third of the farmland that we had in the 1970s. Now, some of that is because we've got better technology now, but a lot of that is because, consolidation and factory farming. You have a situation where, if you do have like these small family farms, they're having a really difficult time adapting. They're not surviving. They're not passing down to the next generation. And even in instances where you have like, Gen Z or millennials, like younger folks that want to take up and farm, they might not be in a position where they can afford to take on the debt. Or maybe the farm still has payments on it, right? And so what happens is like grandma and grandpa die and the farm goes to the bank, or it has to be sold because there's not enough money to update it and modernize it and put it back into production. So all I'm proposing is streamlining some of the resources that are already there, both at the state and federal level, but also creating some new programs with the intent of like, hey, like if you're a mom and pop farm and you're trying to get out of the business, or if your family doesn't want to maintain the farm anymore, hey, maybe we'll come in as the state and we will buy that off of you for fair market value, and then we will match with a young farmer that wants to give it a go, and come up with some sort of system so that they are compensating the state for it fairly, but effectively we are maintaining this legacy of like small agriculture in our state that if we don't do something drastic like that, if we don't step in, is really just going to disappear. I mean, at this point, the number one owner of farmland in the United States is Bill Gates. That's not, probably not going to change unless we do something about it, right? And I don't want to see more farms like the one I grew up on either go under and have to be developed, or like turn into more factory farms. We can do better than that, but it's going to take a concerted effort, and also it's going to take some modernization and like maybe doing things a little bit differently than we used to, right? um, the other policy you asked about was the universal hunter's education. So what I'm proposing there, like I said, I'm not trying to take your guns away. I'm a gun owner myself. I'm very pro Second Amendment for a number of reasons. I think that if you are going to be a responsible gun owner, I think you should, when you are, applying for things like if you want to be a hunter, right, things like that, like I think you should have some kind of mandatory hunter safety like we have. All I'm proposing is we expand it so that it covers things in addition to what it currently has. It covers things like first aid certification, mental health first aid certification, CPR, AED training, and things like emergency management training. And when I say emergency management, that is not just like a term like, oh, I know how to handle emergencies. That is a specific term. I'm talking about like incident command. It's a national standard for things like public transit, police, fire, EMS. Whenever there's an emergency, like a large scale disaster, or even just a large event, like if you have a stadium in your town and somebody's coming, there's like the big game or something, right? Everybody plugs into this universal command structure so that they're all speaking the same language. They all know how to refer to each other, and they can coordinate large scale response with a lot of different industries and players, right? So if you have this emergency management training, if you have first aid training, if you have CPR training, and you've got firearm safety training, it's like this idea of like, I want to be a good guy with a gun. It's like, great, be a good guy with a gun. You have your gun on one hip, you have your first aid kit on the other hip, and you know how to use both of them really well. And if something actually comes up where you're called upon as a volunteer and you want to help out, now you know how to liaise with police, fire, EMS, and everyone else who's going to respond at the scene. You know what you need to do with like, hey, like I'm going to stand over here and cordon traffic. I'm going to go help like run the medical tent. I'm going to go help in the soup kitchen. And now you're actually equipped for a set of situations, whereas before, and I think we've seen this in Idaho, right? I mean, over the summer, we had that tragedy in northern Idaho with the shooting with the firefighters that were involved who lost their lives. And that was a really good example of the kind of situation that I'm saying, maybe if you want to be a citizen volunteer, maybe we incentivize you to have better training so that you can respond to these things more appropriately. And I'm also proposing that in addition to expanding this hunter safety, we also make it free, right? Like we pay the bill with the state money, basically. And if you're a high school student or a college student, we set it up so that you can get credit. That way, it's a strong incentive to go and get this. It's a strong incentive to get training that, like, regardless of the hunter safety component, like you are getting that, very basic first aid training and all of those things that come along with it. Read between the lines. I'm not trying to take your guns away. I'm trying to make your militias better. Yeah. Yeah. Um, there's a lot of things in Idaho where we have had stuff that worked, and for one reason or another, we got rid of it. I think term limits are definitely one of those things. Uh, it's going to take, like with everything else, or well, most of the other things in my platform, like a lot of these things are going to take a concerted popular push, right? Like this is going to be great. We got Maxine elected. Now we're going to pressure our other elected officials to get a bill under her desk, right? So that's step one. As far as like long term, because let's say we get it, right? How do we prevent it from being taken away again? I think long term, you're probably talking about some kind of a constitutional amendment. That is a huge task. I'm not going to pretend like it isn't, but I also think that we're at a point now where, look, it's true at the state level, it's true at the national level, especially like our politicians are old. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't continue to serve if you are able to, regardless of your age. But especially now we're seeing, like, I think just in this last year, I think it was something like seven Democratic Party politicians at the national level have died of age or illness, and that's very sad. But also, it's not like we couldn't have seen that coming. So I think the idea of term limits to create enough churn that you've got fresh faces coming in, it makes it more difficult to dominate like any one political party, any one political faction or set of ideas. You actually have to compete and bring things back to the marketplace, right? Like bring things back to the people. So I think we all understand that it's necessary. Um, the procedures of getting it done, it's like, yeah, I mean, I would say get a bill passed and then try to make it a constitutional amendment and maybe try to do both at the same time, right? You know, none of what I'm proposing is going to be easy, but I think we've let things get so bad for so long that even really basic common sense ideas are going to be a challenge in order to accomplish. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It just means we have to be realistic about what it's going to take to get there. So, and I apologize because it's kind of a long story, but um, I actually was an independent first. The only reason I ever registered as a Democrat was because I saw how Bernie Sanders was treated in the primaries in 2016. I was an independent in 2016. I went to the Idaho Democratic Caucus. I stood in line for several hours. Most of the people who were there for Bernie. And I felt like he got a raw deal, but I also felt like it was pragmatic after the election when a number of state level Democratic parties closed their primaries or caucuses. I felt that it was pragmatic to register as a Democrat at that time because if Bernie ran again, I wanted to I wanted to go and vote in the caucus again, or primary. I wanted to be a part of that process, and I couldn't unless I was registered as a Democrat. Uh, I never ended up participating in the Democratic Party beyond that because, frankly, I didn't really like them any better than I liked the Republicans. I felt like both were bad options. And every time that I have seen Bernie or people like Bernie um, even get close to approaching like genuine power and leadership within the Democratic Party, it seems to get snatched away from them. For those of us on the left, I think we had kind of a come to Jesus moment, 10 years ago, where it's like, okay, look, Bernie didn't win, but like we've had this big movement. These ideas are popular. We need to fight for them. Do we go our own way and like make our own party and try to do it that way, or run independent candidates, or do we try and be pragmatic and work within the party and like people like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and like Dianne Feinstein, like they're not going to be around forever, right? Like eventually they're going to retire, they'll have to give over power, and younger folks will be able to step up and have a say. And I think, looking back, hindsight is 2020, right? Like I was one of the people that thought like, yeah, we should try and work within the existing system. Like why reinvent the wheel, right? I mean, I remember saying that at the time. I was wrong. I think a lot of us were wrong. And I think that if we had just gone our own way and started building a new party, 10 years later, I think we'd probably be getting ready to run a candidate for president of the United States by now. So I was never really that invested in the Democratic Party framework. I feel like they are just as bought as the Republican Party. In a lot of instances, they have the same corporate donors, they have the same very wealthy people influencing them. That's true at the state level as well. I have no interest in that. Um, I have always been a public servant. I have always worked in rank and file, like mostly classified staff positions, like serving people directly. Um, I don't think that what either party does, like going to a cocktail party fundraiser, that's not public service. It's just not. You're serving yourself. You're serving your ego. You're trying to get access. It's got nothing to do with helping. So I don't want their money. I don't want anything to do with them. I don't want any PACs. I certainly don't want groups like APAC. I don't want any money from big oil. None of it, because it comes with too many strings. And the Democrats. I think there's a lot of good people, but like the elected officials are too compromised by nature of having to be a part of that faction. And I also think that given the recent successes that we've seen with people running as democratic socialists, I think that the fervor we're seeing, like regular people, not even just like saying I'm a socialist, but like saying, hey, policies like universal health care and things of that nature like are popular, right? And people want them. This is a sea change, and I think that both parties are functionally dead. I think that you know they'll probably continue to exist in one form or another, but I would imagine that like when Donald Trump is no longer president or when he dies of old age, I mean like when he's no longer a factor, the Republican Party will probably splinter off and no longer be relevant. I think the same is true largely for the Democratic Party as well, and I think that this is now a three front war, right? You have the Democrats, you have the Republicans, and you have people who are independently minded and who are trying to fight for people first policy. I want to be on the side that's for people. I don't want to be on the side that's for big money and corporations. And so, I guess in a nutshell, yeah, I'm an independent. I I wish no ill will towards individuals who vote Democrat or Republican, but both parties are rotten, and I don't think anybody would really disagree with me on that. The biggest thing I can say is if you've heard about my campaign, just look at the platform. Decide for yourself. Are these policies that would help me and the people that I care about? And if they are, I'd really appreciate your support. If you don't agree with me, I'd like to have that conversation. I'm not asking you to change everything about who you are. I'm not asking you to, give up anything. I'm just asking you consider this. Think for yourself about whether or not it works for you personally and the people you love, and make a decision. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Yeah, you do the same. Bye.